My stepdaughter told everyone I wasn't her real dad at her graduation party. So, when she needed $40K for college, I let her biological father handle it, sitting in that packed high school auditorium. Watching Emma cross the stage in her cap and gown, I felt the kind of pride that comes from 12 years of packed lunches, homework battles, soccer practice carpools, and late-night talks about boys. This was my daughter, maybe not by blood, but by every measure that actually matters. I'd been there since she was 6, teaching her to ride a bike in our riverside driveway, helping her build that volcano for the science fair that took over our entire kitchen table for 2 weeks. The graduation ceremony was everything you'd expect. Proud parents with their phones out, kids barely containing their excitement, teachers looking both relieved and emotional. Emma looked radiant up there, and when they called her name for the honor roll recognition, I was the guy whooping loudest from the bleachers. Sarah, my wife, squeezed my hand and whispered that I was embarrassing, but her smile said she didn't mind. But then came the speeches. Emma had been selected as one of 3 student speakers, something she'd worked toward all senior year. I'd helped her practice in our living room, timing her delivery, suggesting where to pause for effect. She'd thanked me for the help, called me her practice audience. I was beaming as she approached the podium, my chest tight with that particular kind of parental pride that makes you want to call everyone you know. Her speech started beautifully, talking about perseverance, about the people who shaped her, about gratitude for those who believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Standard graduation fare, but delivered with the poise of someone who'd been in drama club for 4 years. I was already mentally composing the Facebook post I'd share later. Maybe that photo of us from her first day of high school, where she's rolling her eyes at my insistence on taking pictures. Then she got to the thank you section, the part where she started talking about her father, not me. Not the guy who'd been to every parent-teacher conference, who'd stayed up all night when she had the flu at age 8, who'd taught her to drive in the Target parking lot because she was too nervous for the DMV instructor. She was talking about Marcus, her biological father who'd paid exactly $0 in child support over the years, who'd missed every birthday and Christmas until exactly 1 month ago when he'd suddenly reappeared, all smiles and apologies, about finding himself and being ready to be a real dad now. Standing there at that podium, in front of 300 people including half our neighborhood, Emma looked directly at Marcus in the crowd and said the words that would replay in my head for months afterward. She thanked her real father for finally showing up and for teaching her that it's never too late to fight for what matters. She talked about how his recent presence had shown her what it meant to have a father's love, how his support had given her the confidence to chase her dreams. I sat there feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, my face burning as people around us started turning to look. Some neighbors knew our situation, knew I'd been raising Emma since she was barely out of kindergarten. Mrs. Peterson from next door actually looked horrified. But Emma kept going, talking about being grateful for finally having a real family connection and how Marcus had stepped up to be the father she'd always needed. Not once did she mention me, not the guy who'd spent 12 years being her actual father in every way except biology. After the ceremony, during the reception on the school lawn, Emma came over to where Sarah and I stood near the punch table. She was glowing, clearly still high from her speech, surrounded by friends and relatives offering congratulations. Marcus was right behind her, chest puffed out like he'd personally shepherded her through 12 years of education instead of showing up 4 weeks ago with a leather jacket and stories about his new motorcycle. That's when Emma looked at me and delivered the final blow. In front of my wife's entire family, in front of neighbors who'd watched me walk Emma to the school bus stop every morning for years, she said it. The thing that made everything crystal clear. Updated. The responses to my story have been overwhelming. Some people are asking if I'm overreacting to teenager drama, but 12 years of being someone's dad doesn't disappear because they're 18. Did your own step-parent ever experience something like this? To understand why that moment hit so hard, you need to know how we got there. I met Sarah when Emma was 6, and even then, Marcus was basically a ghost. He'd been in and out of their lives since Emma was born, never consistent with anything, not visits, not calls, and definitely not the child support that was supposed to help with groceries and school clothes and all the expensive reality of raising a kid. Sarah was working double shifts as a nurse at Riverside General just to keep their tiny apartment, and Emma was this quiet, serious little girl who seemed older than her years. I remember our 3rd date. Sarah had to cancel last minute because Emma was sick and she couldn't find a babysitter. Instead of rescheduling, I showed up at their place with soup from Panera and movies from Redbox. Emma was curled up on their secondhand couch, pale and miserable, and something about the way she looked at me, not suspicious like some kids are with new adults, but curious and hopeful, just got to me. After Sarah and I got married, adopting Emma legally was the obvious next step. But Marcus, despite being absent for years at a time, wouldn't sign the papers. He'd disappear for months, then suddenly resurface with promises about getting his life together and being a better father, always just enough to maintain his legal rights, but never enough to actually parent. Sarah would get hopeful, Emma would get excited, and then he'd vanish again, usually around the time some responsibility or commitment was expected. So I became Emma's dad the hard way, by just doing it every single day. I taught her to tie her shoes using that bunny ear method. That took us both weeks to master. I was the one who discovered she needed glasses in 3rd grade because she was squinting at the TV. I sat through every single piano recital, even when she was just playing Mary Had a Little Lamb with 2 fingers. When she wanted to try soccer, I was the guy driving to Target at 8 p.m. because she suddenly remembered she needed cleats for practice the next day. The teenage years brought their own challenges. When Emma was 14 and convinced the world was ending because Jake Morrison didn't ask her to the freshman dance, I was the one who sat on her bedroom floor listening to her cry. When she failed her first chemistry test and was convinced she was stupid, I was the one who found a tutor and sat with her through 2 months of painful study sessions until she pulled her grade up to a B+. Through all of it, Marcus would occasionally surface, a birthday card 3 weeks late, a phone call promising to visit that never materialized. Once, memorably, he showed up to Emma's 8th grade graduation ceremony uninvited, sat in the back row, took selfies with Emma afterward, and then disappeared again for another 18 months. Emma would be devastated for weeks after these interactions, and I'd be the one helping her process the disappointment while also trying not to badmouth her biological father. We had our moments, Emma and I. Real father-daughter moments that felt completely natural and right. When she was 16 and got her first job at the local Starbucks, she was so nervous about her first day that she threw up in the morning. I drove her there anyway, sat in the parking lot for her entire 4-hour shift, and took her out for celebration ice cream afterward. When she was struggling with anxiety during junior year and having panic attacks about college applications, I was the one who found her a therapist and sat in the waiting room during her first appointment because she was too scared to go alone. But there was always this invisible wall, this understanding that Marcus held some special place in her heart that I could never quite reach. She'd light up when he called, even if it had been months since his last contact. She'd mention him to friends like he was a regular presence in her life, glossing over the years-long absences with phrases like, "My dad's been really busy with work." I told myself it was normal, that all kids idealize their absent parents to some degree. I convinced myself that what we had was enough, that the daily reality of our relationship mattered more than biology or titles. I was her dad in every way that counted, right? Apparently not. The graduation party was at our house the next weekend. Sarah had gone all out, rented tables for the backyard, ordered a cake from the fancy place downtown, invited what felt like half the neighborhood. Emma had been excited about it for weeks, talking about how it would be her official launch into adulthood and how she wanted it to be perfect. Marcus, naturally, had inserted himself into the planning. Suddenly, Emma was asking if we could invite some of his friends, people I'd never heard of but who were apparently important to her real family experience. She started referring to decisions as, what Dad thinks we should do, and I noticed that Dad never meant me anymore. The party itself was everything you'd expect from a high school graduation celebration in suburban California. Kids were running around the backyard, parents were clustering near the beverage table making small talk about college plans and empty nest syndrome, and everyone was taking photos. Emma was in her element, social, confident, surrounded by friends who were all heading off to various UC schools in the fall. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs while making conversation with neighbors about Emma's plans. She'd gotten into several good schools but had her heart set on USC. Expensive, but she'd earned it with her grades and test scores. We'd already worked out the financial plan months ago. Between my engineering salary, Sarah's nurse income, and the college savings account I'd been contributing to since Emma was 7, we could swing it without her taking on crushing debt. Marcus was holding court near the pool, telling stories about his various adventures over the years to anyone who'd listen. He was wearing his leather jacket despite the 90-degree heat, and I noticed Emma kept gravitating toward him, laughing at his stories, introducing him to friends as my dad. Every time she did it, I felt a little piece of something die inside. The worst part was watching Sarah navigate it all. She knew how much this was hurting me. But Emma was her daughter, and if Emma wanted to reconnect with her biological father, Sarah wasn't going to interfere. I understood the position she was in, but it still stung to feel like I was supposed to just smile and pretend everything was fine while being erased from my own family narrative. The real moment of truth came when Emma decided to make a toast. She'd been talking about it all week, how she wanted to thank everyone who'd supported her through high school. She climbed up on one of the rental chairs, tapped her plastic cup with a fork, and waited for everyone to quiet down. What followed was worse than her graduation speech. Standing there in our backyard, using our house as the backdrop for her celebration, Emma proceeded to thank Marcus for being the father she'd always needed and for showing up when it mattered most. She talked about how his presence over the past month had made her feel complete, how having her real dad back in her life had given her the confidence to pursue her dreams. Then she looked directly at me and said the words that ended everything between us. She thanked me for being a great stepdad and for helping Mom out all these years. She said she appreciated me being there, but that now that her actual father was back, she felt like she finally understood what a real parent-child relationship was supposed to feel like. Stepdad. After 12 years of being her father in every possible way, I was being publicly demoted to stepdad, in front of everyone we knew, at a party in my own backyard, celebrating achievements I'd supported and sacrificed for. The silence that followed was deafening. People were looking down at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Peterson looked like she wanted to hug me. Even some of Emma's friends seemed confused by the distinction she was making. Marcus, for his part, was beaming like he'd won the lottery. He raised his beer and thanked Emma for giving him the chance to be the father he should have been all along. He made some comment about real family bonds being stronger than anything, and how proud he was of his daughter. I stood there holding my spatula, feeling like I was watching my life implode in slow motion. 12 years of bedtime stories, soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, and heart-to-heart talks had just been reduced to helping Mom out. The kid I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had just told everyone I was essentially a placeholder until her real dad showed up. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I calmly walked over to Emma, put my hand on her shoulder, and said something that made her face go pale. I told her I was happy she'd reconnected with Marcus, and that since she clearly felt he was her real father now, she should probably discuss her college financial planning with him. After all, real fathers handle those kinds of responsibilities. The party got very quiet very quickly after that. Updated. People keep asking if I gave Emma any warning before cutting off college funding. The truth is, she made her choice publicly and repeatedly. Should I have been more direct about the consequences beforehand? What followed was 3 weeks of chaos that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Emma initially thought I was bluffing. She'd spent so many years watching me solve her problems and provide for her needs that the idea I might actually follow through on my ultimatum seemed impossible to her. She kept approaching the topic sideways, mentioning college expenses in casual conversation, dropping hints about needing to submit her enrollment deposit soon. Marcus, meanwhile, had quickly figured out that being a real dad involved more than showing up to parties and giving inspirational speeches. When Emma started talking to him about USC's tuition costs, roughly $40,000 a year, his enthusiasm for active fatherhood began to wane rapidly. Suddenly he was full of advice about choosing practical options and not putting too much pressure on yourself financially. Sarah was caught in the middle, trying to play peacemaker while simultaneously realizing that our family's financial future was now in question. She'd approach me carefully, suggesting that maybe we could work something out, or that Emma was just being a teenager and would come around. But I'd reached a breaking point that surprised even me. After 12 years of being taken for granted, after being publicly demoted to stepdad at what should have been a celebration of our shared achievements, I was done being the solution to problems created by Emma's choices. The real crisis hit when Emma's enrollment deadline approached. USC required a substantial deposit to hold her spot, and she came to me 3 days before the due date, tears in her eyes, finally ready to have the conversation she'd been avoiding. I'll never forget that evening. Emma sat across from me at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped her with homework for years, and tried to explain herself. She said she hadn't meant to hurt me, that she was just excited about reconnecting with Marcus, that she'd always seen me as family but had felt obligated to acknowledge her biological father publicly. She said she hoped I'd understand and help her with college because she'd always counted on me being there. The conversation was heartbreaking because I could see that she genuinely didn't understand the impact of her actions. In her mind, she could have both: the emotional validation of claiming Marcus as her real dad, and the practical support of having me continue to function as her actual father. She'd grown up with me as her safety net, and it had never occurred to her that safety nets can be removed. I explained to her that fathers and stepfathers have different roles and responsibilities. Since she'd made it clear that I was her stepfather and Marcus was her father, it made sense for her father to handle the major financial responsibilities like college tuition. I wasn't angry, I told her. I was just respecting the boundaries she'd established. Emma's response was a mix of panic and indignation. She couldn't understand how I could abandon her over something she saw as a technicality. She'd expected me to be the bigger person, to continue providing for her regardless of how she'd categorized our relationship. The idea that her words might have real consequences seemed to shock her completely. Meanwhile, Marcus was becoming increasingly scarce. His phone calls became less frequent, his visits to our house stopped entirely, and when Emma would mention needing to discuss college plans with him, he'd change the subject or promise to figure something out soon. It became clear that his idea of being a father involved the fun parts, the recognition, the gratitude, the pride, but not the practical responsibilities. 3 days after Emma's USC deadline passed, she got her rejection letter, not because of grades or test scores, but because she'd failed to submit her enrollment deposit. The spot she'd worked 4 years to earn was gone, offered to someone on the waiting list who'd been prepared to commit financially. That's when the real breakdown began. Emma ended up enrolling at the local community college, taking out student loans for the first time in her life. Marcus disappeared entirely once the financial reality became clear. Apparently, his motorcycle adventures were more appealing than college tuition payments. Sarah and I went to marriage counseling to work through the trust and communication issues that Emma's situation had exposed in our own relationship. The hardest part wasn't Emma's anger, though there was plenty of that. It was watching her slowly realize that choices have consequences, that relationships require mutual respect and reciprocity. She'd spent her entire life with me as her safety net, and learning to navigate challenges without that automatic support was painful for both of us. She still knocks on our door sometimes, usually late at night when she's struggling with loan applications, or feeling overwhelmed by working full-time while taking classes. I can see her through the window, and part of me wants to open that door, to go back to being the person who solves her problems and makes everything okay. But I've learned that enabling someone's disrespect doesn't help either of you grow. Sarah and I have found our equilibrium again, though it's different now. We're planning for a future that doesn't include the college expenses we'd saved for, talking about early retirement or maybe finally taking that trip to Europe we'd always postponed. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh, if I should have found a middle ground that preserved our relationship while still teaching Emma about consequences. But then I remember standing in my own backyard, being thanked for helping Mom out after 12 years of being a father, and I know I made the right choice. Love without respect isn't really love at all, it's just convenience. And I finally learned that I deserved better than being someone's convenient solution to problems they'd created by disregarding my worth. Updated. It's been 6 months since I posted this. Emma graduated from community college and transferred to a state school. She sent me an invitation to her graduation, but I haven't decided whether to attend. Would you go?